Hello, this is the second recording in the sequence looking at the Irish alphabet, the Ogham alphabet, and the letters and symbolism of that alphabet. So now we are moving on to this one, Luis, the second letter, which as you can see is the letter L, and is represented not, as a great many books will tell you, by the rowan tree, which is a slightly later edition. The word Luis means flame, fire. It also has a secondary meaning of herb, specifically or particularly healing herbs. And that's a notion we'll come back to as we go along. Later on in the Scholar's Primer and various other texts, it starts to be associated with the rowan, the mountain ash, which is another name for the rowan. And there is a certain kind of visual imagery going on here. If you just adjust that a little bit, there we go. If you think of one of the word owens, the Briacha owen, one of them reads "delight of the eye, to wit, the flame," and another one says "delight of the eye, owing to its berries." So, given that the mountain ash tends to grow up mountains, it likes that sort of higher altitude and climate. If you imagine you're in Ireland and you're looking at a mountain in the distance, and there are all the rowan trees, and they're growing, and this is very dark, this one, isn't it? There we go, a bit into the light. And they're all in berry, and so you've got this sea of orangey, fiery red berries in the distance. It would kind of look as if the mountain is a little bit on fire. And so you can kind of see the connotation between the colour of the berries, especially when you've got loads and loads and loads of trees growing alongside each other, and this idea of flame and fire. You can also, with the imagery of the herb, the healing herb, take into account that the rowan has lots of medicinal properties. It's very high in vitamin C, and as long as you cook it first, the jelly is very good for the very young, the very old, pregnant women, and so forth. Especially in an era before a lot of the modern day dietary supplements existed. It was a very good thing to take if you were suffering coughs and colds, very good for the throat. If you eat it raw, unfortunately, you will probably be locked in the toilet for the rest of the day because it's not good to consume raw. It has to be cooked. And you can soak the berries in spirit, brandy and vodka, things like that, and it will add flavouring to the spirit that you're adding it to. If we think of Luis as, if we talk herbs these days, that has a very specific botanical context. But if we take herb to have meant in early Irish any kind of plant of whatever size or shape that had healing properties, then that could include trees with healing properties and kind of broaden the definition of what constitutes a herb. So, a little bit there. Other aspects to think about. The bird owen is Lachú, the duck, and ducks obviously don't crop up very much at all in surviving Irish and Welsh mythology. There is an appearance of the duck in Gaulish mythology over in, well, it is these days France, with the goddess Sequana, who is the goddess of the river Seine, the spirit of the river Seine. There are images of her from the Romano-British period in which she is either accompanied by a duck or is sitting in a ship, the prow of which is shaped like a duck's beak. You've got a duck's head rather than bill. So she's a goddess linked to waterfowl, to ducks. Unfortunately, I can't find any suggestion of any deity whose name in Irish is cognate with Sequana. There may have been one, of course, going back a long time, and just records haven't been translated or that they've been destroyed over the passage of time, and we've lost sight of whatever name the goddess Sequana would have been known by in Ireland or in Wales. Or simply she may never have been known there at all. Maybe there were no duck goddesses or duck gods known about in either mainland Britain or in Ireland. We just don't know. But aside from her watery connections to the Seine and looking after the people who live on the banks of the Seine or travel down the Seine in ships, we don't know an awful lot about the goddess Sequana beyond that, at least not at a historical level. Absolutely nothing whatsoever to stop you sitting, communing, meditating, praying, talking to the goddess Sequana and seeing what she tells you and what she reveals of herself to you. That would be an eminently perfectly sensible route to go down if you wanted to know more about this sacred nature and the symbolism and metaphor and what have you of ducks. One to consider. Sticking with the associated forms of Ogham, we've got colour Ogham, which is Lia, which means grey. Now there's another one, Taman, which is associated with the letter Tong, the holly tree, which is specifically dark grey. Taman is dark grey. So by contrast, we could assume that Lia is light grey, which is an odd choice of colour if you think that we've just spoken about flame and fire and the orangey red berries of the rowan tree, and here is grey. Well, the bark of the tree is quite grey, in fairness, so maybe it's more connected to the bark than to the berries. In terms of colour imagery, there are various figures that walk around in grey cloaks. The Cailleach, the old woman associated with Munster, for example, the various mountains and caves in Munster. The ancient crone goddess is often described as wrapped in a cloak of grey, so it's very wintry sort of images there that you can kind of see with grey weather and grey skies and so on during the winter months. And there's another figure, the Fearlia, the man, the grey man, the man of the mists, and he appears in the autumnal mists as this rather unclear figure in the distance. Excuse me. In some stories, the Fearlia is a rather dangerous figure who crops up and abducts people in the mists or elbows them off a cliff. And in other tellings of the stories, the Fearlia is a helpful figure who finds people lost and wandering in the mists and steers them away from the cliff's edge and onto a path of safety. Which may be that these are just random stories told about imaginary figures, if you don't believe the Fearlia is a real being. If you are allowing for the possibility, or maybe if you've had an encounter with the Fearlia and you feel that they are very differently real, then maybe it kind of depends upon the person they meet as to whether they feel like excuse me, saving them and redeeming them or shoving them off the nearest cliff. Or it could just be down to the individual temperament of that particular Fearlia. Some are a bit murderous and some are very helpful, who knows. In an attempt, and this is, I will admit, stretching this a little bit heavily, trying to link all of these things together, but as a suggestion, and we'll tie this in with something that I haven't mentioned for the letter B, Bay, and I won't be mentioning it for every single letter I talk across, but there's also a skills Ogham, in which each letter of the alphabet is associated with a different job or trade or career of some sort. I'm not mentioning it for all of them because some of the words are very difficult to translate and no one is quite sure what they mean, and even where some of them are translated it's still rather uncertain in certainty quite what is this that they're talking about. But for this one it's Luamnacht, which means to be a pilot, not of an airplane obviously, but a ship's pilot, the man or woman as the case may be, steering the wheel of the ship and taking it off and cutting the sails and all those nautical jargon terms that I don't quite understand to direct the ship where it's going. Which brings in images of Manannán Maclir, the Irish god of the ocean wave, who's got a ship called the Wave Sweeper, which is a magic ship, obviously, he's a god. One of its magical properties is that it can steer itself, it doesn't need a pilot, it's like a thinking ship. It knows where it's going, or at least you tell it where you want to go and it kind of takes you off there. One of the other qualities, the magical traits of the ship, is that it can track other vessels. A little bit like a sniffer dog on land, going off after escaped convicts and what have you. The wave sweeper can follow where other ships have gone, even when those ships have long since gone and are no longer visible, no longer followable. Trying to tie all this imagery back in together. The flame imagery, the fiery imagery, and the greyness of the mist, and the sea, the fogs at sea and that sort of thing, which is very much part of Manannán Maclir's panoply of abilities, is to whip up this very dense fog at sea so no one can quite see what's happening and what's going on, and mysterious things happen at sea, especially in those mists. So far as I know, they never had lighthouses in Iron Age Ireland, but I'm sure they had enough sense that when the fisher folk and merchants and whatnot were off at sea, if a dense fog whipped up, that they would have lit bonfires to help direct the ships back to the coast. So bonfires either to steer them away from the rocks or perhaps draw them in towards safe harbour and safe bays. And so you're lost in the mists at the sea and you see the fire ahead of you, the flame, and it's your place of safety. It's what you're guiding yourself towards, or being guided towards rather. In the same way that on land, the traveller on foot or horseback going through some dark forest or what have you, sees in the distance the fires of a village. Not only perhaps the flicker of fires in the individual roundhouses, but on the palisade around they would have had torches at night to help people, guide people in. And so it's a thing to aim for, that light, as you find your way through life and its vicissitudes. And that if you're doing divinatory readings and it comes up for somebody, could suggest that they have a kind of a guiding light leading them on to a place of safety and security, and that they should pay particular heed to whatever that metaphorical light may be. It's guiding them to where they need to go. Excuse me, bad throat at the moment. Talking far too much as usual. We'll stretch that a bit further. There is an association with the rowan tree and the goddess Brige, and also the Christian saint St. Bridget. That the goddess Brige is linked to the homestead of the old Iron Age farms. She's the goddess who protects the farms, and she also teaches and inspires and looks over the various crafts and skills associated with running a good homestead. So back in the day when all farmers' wives churned their own butter and made their own cheese and brewed their own beer, farmers, the male farmers as well, did all those kinds of things. There was lots of domestic skills that were important to the running of a good home and a good farm. Brige is the goddess very much associated with all those kinds of things. And with the hearth fire itself, she's the goddess of flame, the goddess of fire, particularly the fire poetry to inspire in the head, the physician's fire, which goes with Lush and the image of the healing herb, and the blacksmith's fire, where the ploughshares and the saws and all cauldrons and all the rest of it are made upon the blacksmith's fire. And that fire fundamentally is the fire at the very heart of the roundhouse, the cooking pit, the fire everyone sits around of a winter's day and warms themselves by, and the storyteller sits by and regales you with stories, and Grandad tells you stories, and all the rest of it. It's the home fires. And that is we all get World War I from it, keep the home fires burning. Very much an image that I think ancient peoples would have grasped as well, that whether you are off breaking your back tilling in the fields to provide food for your family, you come home aching like hell, covered in shit and mud, or whether you're a warrior off defending your family and you come home with cuts and bruises and blood everywhere and having seen horrific things, what do you come back to? You come back to home, not just a roof and a door. You come back to family, to people you love, to people you belong amongst, to the comforts of home, good food, a warm fire, a hot bath, and they were very big on their bathhouses back in that day and age. You come back to all the things that make life worthwhile. So you put up with the hardships of tilling the fields or hunting in the forests or gathering berries halfway up a windswept mountain or whatever the hell it is that you're doing. You put up with all of those horrible hardships because you have the warmth and the comfort and the love and the security and the nice food and the good drink and the camaraderie and all of that of home to come back to. It is your guiding light, your fire that you aim for at the end of a hard day's labour. And Brige, the goddess, is all of those things. She embodies and oversees all of those things, and it has all of that kind of subtext to it in a divinatory context. If you're drawing this stave in a reading, that this is the home, the hearth, the place of safety, the place of security, the things that make life worthwhile, that draw that person in. And I'm reminded of the importance of home, the importance of safety. You could have talismans with Lush burned upon them or painted on them and hanging around the house as an image of safety and security in the sanctuary. Brige and the Christian Saint Bridget are associated with the festival of Imbolc in early February, which in the Christian calendar is usually called Candlemas, because it's the lighting of all of the candles, and the fire symbolises the sort of the purity of the Virgin Mary and so on, as well as St. Bridget herself. So we're back to fire and fire imagery again, and again, think early February in Iron Age Ireland or Iron Age Britain. No radiators, no umbrellas or any of that. It's cold, it's muddy, it's wet, it's bloody horrible. You don't go out much, you certainly don't have massive parties at the King's Palace. You stay at home, have a few friends round. You have your ritual at home. It's not one of those big shindig festivals like Beltane or Samhain. It's a quiet, homely festival where you think about the importance of your family, your loved ones, the people who do all the cooking and the cleaning and the tend your wounds if you get an injury and all of that, which most of the time would have been the women folk, of course, because the herb wives, you might have gone to perhaps a male surgeon for more heavy duty medical interventions, although there are suggestions of female surgeons as well, but the majority of medical care would have been stuff, potions, homemade remedies, concocted by your mother or your granny or your auntie, some female relative who'd learnt their healing arts from their mother, their granny, and all the way back to the doctors. These traditions and practices were passed down. And again, we're back to the kind of connection between fire and healing herbs. Because the majority of healing herbs, you don't take them raw, you cook them, you prepare them, you boil them into a potion, or mash them up or whatever. And so fire becomes a part of the healing process. And of course, for the more drastic injuries, back in the days we're talking about, then heating up a blade in the fire and using it to cauterise a wound, which I must have hurt like very hell, that would have been the saviour of life quite often. The thing that kept you alive was the fact that your wound had been cauterised, and so you didn't bleed to death or suffer horrific infections. And the more high end, for the very, very skilled surgeons and so on. And we know that in Colchester, for example, they found the grave of a doctor, almost certainly a druid, whose medical tools had been buried with him. These surgical instruments were of such a high standard that they're near identical to the ones used in modern day surgery, because there haven't been that many improvements made in the intervening couple of thousand years. They were so good. Part of the purifying process for those tools would have been to heat them in flames before using them on the body. Not cooling them down, obviously, but to kill off microbes and infections and things, to ensure the survival of the patient. So again, fire as a cleansing, a purgative force that prevents infection and disease, as well as cauterising wounds and boiling up potions and that sort of a thing. They all interrelate and tie in with each other. Another of the Priaha Ogham, of the word Oghams, is friend of cattle, sustenance of cattle. It's another one. Brige, the goddess, is very much associated with, again, you say the homestead, but not just the humans in the homestead, the sheep, the cows, the goats, the various creatures that farmers had living cheek by jowl with them. She's the protector of the herds from disease, from predators, from being raided by rival tribes and cattle thieves making off with your cows and your sheep in the night. She's the one who protects you all of that. There's a tradition of making the Breed's Cross, which has a Christian counterpart as well, with St. Bridget, sometimes of straw, but quite often with rowan twigs, all tied together with red thread. And the colour of the thread is important again. The rowan berry is red, obviously, and the fire is red. Returning to that sort of imagery, and the Breed's crosses would be hung from nails in cattle sheds and sheep pens and such like places to protect the creatures from all of the things I've just mentioned. So it's that sort of imagery coming into play again. In terms of the number Ogham, we're on to the number 2, which doesn't crop up an awful lot. There's lots of romantic partnerships, young lovers and old lovers and what have you in Celtic mythology, but it's difficult to kick the arse too much out of that one, read too much into it. One writer now, who's dead now, a very, very learned man who spoke dozens of languages, Alexei Kondratiev, put forward the idea, somewhat inspired by Taoism perhaps, that there were two dual philosophical forces which the ancient Celts would have understood, which he refers to as Samos and Yamos, summer and winter, dark and light, hot and cold. So very much like the Tao in Chinese mysticism. Whether that was just the product of his fertile imagination, he was a very creative man, or whether there is any realistic bedrock to that in ancient times, who can say? But an idea to put out there. You could see the duality of the number two reflected in that kind of summer-winter dichotomy. Certainly if you're from a Wiccan background, then the whole sort of Summer King, Winter King, Oak Lord, Holly Lord, etc. has its appeal, perhaps, in that side. Fits with that kind of perspective. Again, how historically valid that is, I don't know, but it's an idea that's very popular in modern times nonetheless. Coming on to mythology, the rowan crops up in a couple of myths. It's not a large number of myths, but a couple of myths within Ireland and Wales and so on. One of the chief ones is an Irish myth called the Hostel of the Quicken Trees, Quicken being another old name for the rowan tree, in which Finn McCall, who is now in advancing years, the great hunter, warrior, druid of Leinster, he leads his band of merry warriors off on an adventure, and they see in the distance a whole copse of rowan trees, very fiery red berries everywhere. And in the middle of this copse of rowan trees is a large building, a large roundhouse, a hostel, which is like the Iron Age version of a hotel, really, a place where visitors could stay and be looked after and nurtured and so forth. Kind of like a YMCA hostel these days, but somewhat more upmarket. And they get close to this building, and it's beautifully made. The thatch is all very clever and layered and patterned. The walls of the building are ornately carved. It just looks, the dog's stank is, it looks amazing. And they go inside this building, and the door slams shut. And then the fairy glamour, the charm, the spell wears off. Once they're inside, it's dirty and filthy, and the roof is badly put together, and it's leaking, and there's holes in the walls, and the wind is blowing through, and it's a dump. Basically, it's a dump. But they're trapped inside this dump by the spells of a bunch of people who come in to try and slaughter them all. Finn McCall wins, fights them all off. That's another story in itself. But they are deceived by this fairy glamour and be trapped into this building. And you can read a bit of a sort of fool's gold message in there that, not everything that glitters is gold, not everything that looks wonderful is as wonderful as it looks from the outside. So be very careful about being led astray. Buyer beware and all of that. So if that came up in reading, maybe negatively aspected, you might suggest that the person needs to be very cautious about being suckered in by something that looks a damn sight better than it actually is. Being misled by a fancy exterior that is not reflected by what's underneath. Whether that's a car that turns out to be a botch job, or a house that turns out to be a money pit, or a relationship with someone who looks really lovely but turns out to be a complete nutter. Whatever context it may be in, do not be suckered in by nice outward appearances. The story rolls on quite a lot. It's a very, very big saga, and eventually Finn, in old age, decides he'll get married again, and the marriage is arranged with one of his political alliances with another big important family, and there's a banquet at which he gets to meet his fiancée, and she gets to meet him for the first time. Grania, this lovely young thing, and there is Finn, who is now an old man, as I say, rich and famous and powerful and everything, but she claps eyes on him and she thinks, he looks older than my dad, he's all wrinkly and grey, and I don't fancy that. And at this banquet, with all the warriors and the lords and the ladies and what have you, and there is Dermot, Finn's right-hand man, his best friend, his loyalist companion, and he's young and fit and catwalk model type stuff. So Grania capsizes on Dermot, and she thinks, woof, I'd much sooner have him than that old man over there. And one thing leads to another, and it's a familiar theme in stories, King Arthur, Guinevere and Lancelot and all that sort of thing. It's repeated the world over. She works her magic. She casts a spell, a geisha, upon Dermot and forces him to elope with her. He doesn't want to. He wants to be loyal to his friend, to his king, his liege lord, but the spell is a spell, magic is magic, he can't resist. And so he has to run off with her. And again, one thing leads to another, and she ends up pregnant, very heavily pregnant by this juncture in the story. She gets the cravings as pregnant women do. She says, oh, I really fancy some rowan berries. Not just any old rowan berries, I want magic rowan berries. And there, up ahead in the woods, is this giant magic rowan tree, guarded by a ferocious giant, and Dermot, still under the influence of those spells, that magic, has to go and battle the giant and defeat him and kill him, and then takes a couple of basketfuls of these berries back to Grania, who scoffs them. And he's back up the tree, probably to get a few more berries, when who turns up but Finn, McCall and his warriors. They too have been in search of this rowan tree, and they find the giant dead and half the berries gone, and they think, oi, 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 I guess who's been here before us? Because we really know that Grania likes rowan berries. So. And they decide to have a bit of a break from their adventures, and Finn and his son Sheen set up chairs and tables, and they put out a Fitchel set, which is a game, a board game, a little bit like chess. It's a strategy game. And they're sitting there playing this game of Fitchel, and they're probably having a swig of mead or whatever whilst they're doing it. And Sheen has never beaten his father. His father's much better at playing this game than Sheen is. But every time Sheen goes to make a wrong move, a rowan berry falls from the top of the branches and goes bonk on the square that Sheen ought to be playing his move on. And so Sheen very quickly takes the guidance of the rowan berries and wins the game for the first time in his life. And the father of Finn is a bit knocked, not so much at his son winning the game, but at the realisation of those berries aren't just randomly falling, they're being dropped. And who is the only person who's ever beaten him in a game of Fitchel? Well, his old, previous, now ex-friend, Dermot. And so he twigs Dermot is up the rowan tree. And one thing leads to another. Eventually Dermot dies at the end of the story, but that's some way ahead. And yet it all ends in shit and grief. It's not one of the happier stories. There, the rowan is being used to give guidance, to give strategy. Fitchel, a bit like chess, is a strategy game, one that has this association with teaching cunning and cleverness and forward thinking and battle strategy. So you learn on the board game, and then you apply that knowledge, those skills, to real life on the battlefield. And that brings us back to Brige, the goddess, who, rather like Athena or Minerva, and I'm not saying they're all the same deity, but they're similarities in temperament. She is not only a goddess associated with the skills of the homestead, things I've just mentioned, weaving and sewing and churning butter and looking after livestock and so on, but she's a goddess associated with battle strategy. She's the sort of the bedrock of the image of Britannia under the Roman influence. She's a warrior goddess, one who protects the home and the hearth and the farmlands. But rather than being a sort of raging, blood-hungry goddess screeching across the battlefields, she is more of a planner, a strategist, one who thinks ahead, who organises and wins the battle through cleverness rather than through sheer brute force or love of carnage or whatever. So she shares that sort of temperament with Athena and Minerva. And again, guiding, the rowan berries being used to guide a game of strategy, it has a certain echo. I might be reading way too much into this and stretching it to the point of going twang, but there are themes at play here, I would suggest, that interweave with each other. Last bit, I think, Yeah, it is largely, yeah. To mention is that the rowan is not the only tree associated with the Meadowlush. It's also linked to the elm tree, and indeed the link with the elm tree may be older possibly than the link with the rowan tree. The elm doesn't crop up an awful lot in Irish mythology either, unfortunately, except as a little bit of a tree of ill omen, but that's more to do with the pragmatic realities that elm trees frequently drop their branches. And if you're underneath at the time and this bloody great big branch lands on your head, you're either going to end up with a broken bone or dead. And so there's various advice, folklore advice as well as common sense advice, to avoid spending time sitting under elm trees because you might come off the worse for it. And that suggests a very different kind of character and temperament from the largely benevolent rowan tree that is more commonly associated these days. But something to be aware of, whether that changes your interpretation, that's up to you and the result of your meditations and contemplations and so on. But anyway, I think that's covered more than enough ideas of rambling for now, so we'll end that one there. And again, any questions, if you do ask, and I'll attempt to answer them either in writing via the blog or maybe with a follow-up podcast. Yeah, thank you.